If you've spent any time on the internet, or in the car driving home as a child, you've probably heard the words, "We have food at home." It's something vaguely similar to the McDonald's you're asking for, but we all know it's not really going to cut it. Back in the day, even Seiko was trying to pull a fast one with this watch. Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we have something that you won't see too often these days. A Seiko that looks a lot like another watch that comes from a different brand, and not its own back catalogue. It's probably what you'd get if you asked Mum for a Rolex Submariner on the car ride home, only to be told we have one at home already. This is the Seiko SKX031. Well, I don't know about you, but I learned pretty fast not to even bother asking the question on the car ride home. But if I did, I think I'd still be pretty happy if this was waiting for me. It comes from Seiko's SKX line of watches, but is not quite as well known as the 007 or 009. It got the nickname of Seiko Submariner for fairly obvious reasons. The case with crown at 3, flanked by crown guards, the bezel insert graded to 15, and that dial layout, with an almost triangle at 12, plus rectangles at 6 and 9. Those thin lugs make it more like some of the older versions rather than more recent ones, though there is definitely more than a passing resemblance. But they say imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, right? Speaking of older models, this one was actually first produced back in 1996, although my example here came a bit later, in 1998. It definitely feels like a watch from that time. The folded links, thin pressed clasp, aluminium insert and smaller case size give it a distinctly vintage feel. 26 years old may not be vintage, I'll give you that, but it has the look and feel of something a bit older. I really like that about this watch. It's got character, doesn't try too hard, and it could probably tell you a story or two over a couple of beers. If we move in and take a closer look, we're first presented with a very simple dial. It's just matte black, no sunbursts, no texture or anything else. The Seiko logo is applied, as opposed to just printed on the more famous Seiko SKX models, and beneath it, the word automatic is printed in white. Just having that logo applied, I feel really elevates the look of the watch, and together with the polished applied frames of the indices, catches the light occasionally. We have that almost triangle at 12, circles for most other hours, and rectangles at 6 and 9. At 3 there is the day and date sitting neatly within a beveled frame, and the rectangular shape works well to not stand out too much with the 9 o'clock marker matching. Finally below the pinion is the last piece of the dial puzzle. The 10-bar water resistance rating is printed in white, but Seiko split the words water resist with that 10-bar rating. It's a pretty bold design choice on an otherwise plain and simple watch, but the more I look at it, the more I enjoy it. Surrounding that dial, and helping to give you a better read of the time, is a matching black chapter ring. Minutes are printed in white, and each 5 slightly emphasized. Alignment of chapter rings on Seiko divers can be sketchy at the best of times, but there is definitely something going on with this one. That small gap between the dial and the chapter ring makes me think that someone has been in here and not quite put it back together 100% properly, because it wiggles around and out of place when you shake the watch. So, you might see it move around slightly over the course of the video. Finally, we have the hands, and these will be very familiar if you've had or handled another SKX. The hour hand is this tapering pentagon shape, while the minute hand is an arrowhead. Both have these syringe tips to extend them just that little bit extra. They are both polished, whereas the second hand has been painted white and has a little arrow tip. Both the indices and the hands have received Seiko's Lumi-Bright Lume, and have held up decently well. It won't knock your socks off or anything, but you'll be able to get a read of the time for a good while after the lights go out. You will also notice here that there is no lume outside of the dial. That is, no lume pip on the bezel. So, if you were really looking to use this as a diver, you're out of luck. Speaking of bezels, this watch has one. I'd like to tell you more about the action and how many clicks it has, but unfortunately, this one has more or less seized up and is very difficult to turn. I don't tend to use bezels on dive watches very often anyway, so I'm not too bothered by this. The insert is aluminium and a slightly glossy black. We've got the classic triangle at 12 and numerals at every 10 going around. From 12 to 3, the bezel has also been graded with each minute marked. If we look from the side, we can see that the bezel itself is something of a coin edge bezel, and the insert actually sticks out a little higher than the crystal. That crystal is of course hardlex and dead flat. This watch comes from before the days of anti-reflective coatings being commonplace, and so it has none, but it does a good enough job of managing them regardless. Moving out even further, let's take a look at the measurements of the watch. With a case size of between 39.5 and 40mm, depending on where you measure, it's a very comfortable, very classic size. Coincidentally, it's also very similar to a Submariner as well. The height is quite good for a Seiko diver at just 12mm, but maybe that has been reined in thanks to the 100 instead of 200 meters of water resistance. The lug-to-lug of this watch is also very compact, at just 45.8mm, which helps the watch to wear very comfortably. When the bezel itself is already 40mm, a lug-to-lug of under 46 is a pretty impressive feat. Seiko are very good at this after all, so we should expect it to an extent. The other measurement which is a bit surprising is the lug width, being 22mm. Normally I would not like this, but as we'll see later, the taper of the bracelet really helps in that respect. Earlier, I mentioned how this watch, to me at least, has a bit of a vintage feel. A big part of that comes down to the design of the case. Those short lugs extending out from the case are very narrow. A modern Submariner with a maxi case has quite large shoulders for lugs, but older models have much sharper lugs. This makes the watch look a bit more elegant to my eyes. The tops of those lugs are vertically brushed, whereas the side of the case is polished. From the side we can see just how little the case is curved overall, but that short lug to lug means it doesn't really matter too much. On the side of the watch we have the crown, flanked by crown guards. This crown is at the 3 o'clock position rather than 4, where a lot of other Seiko divers have theirs located. That crown is polished, unsigned, and a little on the smaller side compared to something like an SKX009. That crown does screw down, as does the caseback, which gives the watch its 100 meter water resistance rating. It's a solid caseback rather than see-through, which is fine, because sitting behind it is a Seiko 7S26 movement. This is the same basic movement that went into almost every Seiko 5 watch, and lacks the hacking and hand-winding features of the 4R series used now. It's fairly basic, but reliable and robust, though I think this one will probably be needing a service soon. From the back here we get a peek at the bracelet, in particular those hollow end links. They don't bother me too much, as they suit the rest of the watch when you keep in mind when it was made. It's not just the end links though. The links themselves are hollow and made of rolled steel. Even so, they feel reasonably solid and comfortable when wearing. The bracelet is made up of 3-piece brushed links and tapers from that 22mm at the case to about 17.5 at the clasp. That significant taper is what helps to balance out the wider than expected lug width on the watch. The clasp itself is pressed in both construction and closure, with no buttons to release. Instead, you do it the old-fashioned way and get a fingernail underneath the end of the clasp and pull. It's a bit hollow feeling overall, but all of this in combination with the watch gives it some character in my opinion. One thing I do like is that the clasp is quite slim and not very chunky like we see fairly often on newer watches these days. There are 5 positions for micro adjustment along the clasp, which covers quite a bit more than the length of a single link. At least Seiko went the extra mile and branded the fold-over keeper on the clasp. With all that out of the way now, let's get it on wrist and see how it wears. Even without seeing it like this, just based on those dimensions, you could probably guess that this watch would wear really nicely. It sits fairly low on the wrist, and the monochromatic color scheme keeps it low-key. There is a reason that Rolex and many other brands use 40mm as a case size for divers, and it's because it just works so well. My wrist is 7 inches, and after wearing some bigger, chunkier modern divers, this is really refreshing to wear. Turning my wrist, you can see that it's a very flat watch, and feels every bit that 12mm. It might be a bit light and flimsy in hand, but when you're wearing the watch, it feels as solid as anything else. So, there's a lot to like when it comes to this watch. It's not a watch you would try and track down for the technical specs or the movement, but if you've got an itch for an older sub, this might just scratch it. I could complain about the movement, the hollow end links, the hollow bracelet, the pressed clasp, the lack of anti-reflective coating, the lack of lume on the bezel insert, the movement that doesn't hack or hand wind, and the interesting design choice to display 10 bar on the dial. But I won't. This watch is a product of its time, and at that time, those characteristics in a watch were the norm. Even Rolex used folded links in their bracelets for a very long time. The only real complaint I have about this watch is that it can be harder to track down. But that's something I could apply to all SKX models, not just this one. If you find one for a decent price, in decent condition, it's a great little watch that really can be worn every day. What do you think about this watch? Would you mistake it for a Rolex? Could you deal with all the shortcomings? Did you ever actually stop at McDonald's on the way home? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.